Episode 7, Detaille Island. February 26th, 2024. An early wake-up call drags me reluctantly from the depths of sleep. I'm still super tired, so I decide to skip breakfast this morning and sleep in a little more. My mind empties and my body sinks heavily into my bunk as sleep comes to claim me once more. Suddenly, the loudspeaker jolts me back into the land of the living. Orcas! On the port side of the ship. I'm awake and alert immediately, running around the cabin to throw on some clothes, shove my feet into my shoes, and grab my camera. I take the stairs 2 at a time and burst out on deck. There! I spot the disturbance on the surface of the water a ways away. I quickly grab my camera and set it to max zoom. I watch, spellbound, as I see orcas in the wild for the first time. They are spectacular creatures, a rare combination of brute strength and gentle grace, controlled by brilliant minds that we still don't fully understand. It is an indescribable joy to watch them through my camera lens. Not for the first, and definitely not for the last time, I'm on cloud 9 with my decision to bring this camera along. The zoom capabilities alone have already allowed me to both see and capture things I never would have been able to before. I watch the orcas as they fade from view. As the euphoria starts to fade, the cold creeps in. I was in such a rush to get on deck to see the orcas that I'm only wearing my base layer long underwear. No jacket, no gloves, and no hat. At our current location cruising the Lalamand Fjord, the blistering summer temperatures have reached a balmy 28 degrees. Not too bad, until you add in the wind, the clouds, and the snow. Well, and the fact that I'm basically in my undies. Such is a beautiful summer day beneath the Antarctic Circle. I quickly make my way back into the warmth of the ship, along with the rest of the orca watchers, and head back to my cabin to put on some more clothes. My bone-deep fatigue from wake-up call this morning has vanished, replaced by the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed excitement of an Antarctic explorer, ready to take on this new day and the next extraordinary things this great adventure has to offer. Soon enough, Hondius has arrived at our landing site for today, Detaille Island. This is a particularly interesting spot for our first landing south of the Antarctic Circle because, in the 1950s, it was the site of the British Antarctic base, Base W. If you're wondering why it's called Base W, sorry, I don't have any interesting story about a whale or anything else to tell you. The British literally just started with the letter A and named their new bases with the next letter in the alphabet. If we've learned anything so far on this trip, I guess it's that humans are incredibly unimaginative when it comes to naming things. Base W was built in 1956 and used mostly for meteorological and geological research and mapping purposes. It played a critical role in providing information for the International Geophysical Year in 1957 through 1958. If you aren't familiar, the IGY was essentially an international collaboration between 67 different countries to make new scientific discoveries with each other, with Antarctica and the poles being of particular interest at this time. It's a good thing the IGY ended in 1958, because Base W was abandoned only a year later in 1959. Why did it operate for such a short time? Well, Antarctica did what Antarctica seems to do best, and threw a wintry curveball at the Base W scientists. They were happily going about their days in their hut when the sea ice began to build up, more and more and more, until there was so much ice that the water faded out of sight entirely. Soon enough, word reached them that their supply ship, the Biscoe, cruising along the edge of the pack ice, had no way in to reach them. And to make matters worse, that pack ice that separated the Biscoe and Detaille Island, it was 30 miles wide. Confronted with the morbid certainty that they would soon run out of food and die, thus becoming the next in a long line of explorers and scientists to fall victim to the siege of the Great White Continent, they made the easy decision to get the heck out of Dodge. Taking only what was absolutely necessary, the men harnessed the sled dogs and set out on the journey across the ice to reach the Biscoe. Once safely aboard, I guess the British decided it probably wasn't worth the risk to send anyone back next year. And if this story wasn't exciting enough for those of you who love a good survival story, I have a great one to share in the form of a canine named Steve. As the Base W men sledged across the ice with their dogs, Steve must have decided to heck with it and escaped. With no time to spare, the men had no choice but to continue onto the ship, leaving Steve behind to his certain death on the pack ice in Antarctica. But of course, I wouldn't be telling this story if that's what happened. Instead, over 3 months later, British scientists at Base Y on Horseshoe Island, 70 miles further south, were surprised when Steve came running into camp, happy and healthy. It appears he lived off the seal scrap pile left behind at Detaille Island, until he realized that his friends probably weren't coming back, and made the decision to seek out some new ones on Horseshoe. Okay, history lesson over. First up today for the Orange Group is the Zodiac Cruise. Today's cruise is dominated by the plethora of amazing iceberg formations all around us. Each one is unique, and I love being surprised by every new berg we come across. The ever-present Antarctic fur seals are here too, some playing in the water, and some taking much-needed naps on icebergs or little islands. We cruise around the backside of Detaille Island to check out an Adelie penguin colony. I think these guys always look a bit more serious than the other penguin species. After an hour, it's time to make our landing. The brash ice is pretty thick near shore, but the Zodiac cuts through it with no problem. On land, we quickly make our way up to the first human structure we've seen in several days, Base W. After it was abandoned in 1959, the base was slowly swallowed up by years of heavy snowfall and ice until it was eventually completely buried. In 2007, the base was chosen as a heritage site, at which time preservation experts went back to dig it out. They repaired the collapsed roof and carefully collected all of the artifacts, which had been perfectly preserved by the frigid temperatures. After much work, Base W was restored to its original glory, an eerie time capsule of March 31st, 1959. Since it was an emergency, they left everything out. Their skis and their polar clothing, which doesn't look that warm to be honest, are still hanging on the hooks in the entryway. Their newspaper sits on the table, their books still on the shelves, their maps and papers spread out for their work. Cans of food are stacked in the pantry, and their cots are still made with their blankets. It's truly a sight to see, a living snapshot of history. I spend plenty of time enjoying all of the little details here. Soon, it's time to let the next group in to see the base, so I venture out into the gently falling snow to explore the rest of Detaille Island. Judy and I do a lap around the perimeter, enjoying the beautiful scenery of the deep south and a few penguins. A couple of skuas also make an appearance. The snow here is deeper than anywhere else we've been, and I watch some people step off the hard-packed path and disappear up to their thighs, and usually fall over. It's pretty funny when no one gets hurt. After our loop, I climb aboard a Zodiac with my favorite, Micah, for a second cruise. This time we see even more icebergs. Suddenly, there's a tremendous noise. A berg not far from us calves twice, sending ice crashing into the water. The wave from this event ripples its way out to us, rocking our Zodiac gently. We are also lucky enough to see a large male fur seal scratching his backside and preening. He takes up the stance I will quickly come to consider a fur seal's signature pose. Sat down on its rump and arching itself backwards, nose up in the air in feigned indifference. Next, I see my first and, unfortunately, my last Weddell seal of the trip. He's facing away from me, so I don't get great pictures, but I'm glad to have seen this cutie pie anyways. Weather conditions start to worsen, so we decide to head back to the ship. Surveying the increasing swell, I quickly stow my camera away in my waterproof backpack. Today has been a real struggle in keeping it dry with the wind and the snow, But boy am I glad I put it away when I did, because as soon as we arrive at the ship, the waves slam the side of the Zodiac against the hull of the ship, sending huge gushes of water over our boat. I'm in waterproof gear and my hood is up, so, of course, the chilly Antarctic water finds its home in the only place I'm not totally sealed up, my mittens. Freezing wet fingers aside, it was a fantastic morning of history and discovery. During lunch, we watch out of the massive windows as we cruise along. Originally, the plan was to keep heading south for another Zodiac cruise, but the weather threw a wrench in our plans. Instead, we will now be turning around to retrace our steps northward where better weather awaits. We mark this moment with triumphant jubilation, the achievement of our furthest southern latitude, 66 degrees, 52 minutes south. In the afternoon, it's back to our regularly scheduled lecture programming. We listen as Pellin tells us about the French Antarctic expeditions completed by Charcot. The first from 1904 to 1907 aboard the Francais, and the second from 1908 to 1910 aboard the Pourquoi. During these expeditions, Charcot and his men mapped more than 1,000 miles of Antarctic shoreline, by far the most successful Antarctic expedition in this endeavor. At 3:30 p.m., the ship blows its horn once again as we make our way back across the Antarctic Circle. Tonight, we give a bittersweet farewell to the deep south as we follow the ghost of the Francais northward along the peninsula. The same breathtaking landscapes that awed and inspired Charcot and his men, still knocking us off our feet 120 years later.